It started as a dream of peace, not a nightmare. Jack and Janet Smurl had spent most of their young marriage chasing stability. They were the kind of people neighbors liked: quiet, kind, devout. When they bought the modest duplex at 328 Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, they thought their luck had finally turned. The year was 1973, and the world outside seemed hopeful. Factories hummed, families filled church pews on Sundays, and the American dream still felt within reach. The Smurls wanted nothing more than a home for their 4 daughters, a place where birthdays would echo through the hallways and the air would smell like Sunday dinners and summer rain. But the air inside that house would soon take on another scent, something sore, something heavy, something that whispered, "You are not alone." At first, everything seemed fine. They shared the duplex with Jack's parents, who lived on the other side of the wall. The arrangement was practical: family close enough to help, privacy enough to breathe. Janet loved the sunlight that poured through the front windows every morning. She painted the kitchen herself, humming as she worked. But within weeks, she began to notice strange things. Small things, things easy to dismiss. The radio would change stations by itself. The kitchen clock ticked erratically, skipping seconds as if time itself hip-hooped inside those walls. Once, while cleaning, she heard someone whisper her name, soft, almost kind, though no one was home. She turned, expecting to see one of her daughters, but the hallway was empty. The whisper came again, closer this time, just beneath her ear. That night she didn't sleep. Then came the smells. A rancid odor like rotting meat, seeping from corners that should have been clean. It would fill the room and vanish within seconds. No source, no logic. Jack blamed old plumbing, bad insulation, a rodent maybe. But even he couldn't explain the cold spots, sudden pockets of freezing air that appeared even when the furnace was burning hot. Sometimes, Janet would walk through the hallway and feel a chill sweep through her bones, the kind that made your heart stutter for a moment. As months passed, the small disturbances became patterns. Footsteps echoed in the attic at night, the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor above their heads. Doors opened on their own. The family dog growled at corners, teeth bared, eyes locked on nothing visible. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Janet saw a dark blur in her peripheral vision, like a man-shaped shadow gliding across the room. She froze, blinked, and it was gone, but the fear didn't leave with it. By 1975, the laughter that once filled the Smurl home had thinned. The children began waking at night, crying that someone was talking to them through the walls. Jack would comfort them, telling stories about angels watching over them, but deep down, he felt something else watching, something that wasn't angelic. Electrical problems worsened. The television flickered even when unplugged. Janet once found water dripping from the ceiling even though the roof was perfectly dry. The family called repairmen, electricians, plumbers. All left confused, scratching their heads. "Everything's working fine," they said. "You're just unlucky, I guess." But luck had nothing to do with it. By the summer of 1978, the Smurls began to realize that whatever lived with them wasn't just mischievous. It was angry. Furniture trembled during prayer. Pictures fell from walls the moment they mentioned moving. Janet started hearing growls, deep, guttural sounds that vibrated through the air and made her chest tighten. Once, as she walked into the kitchen, the entire drawer of utensils flung open and scattered across the floor as if thrown by invisible hands. Jack arrived seconds later, but the air had already turned still, eerily still. The only sound was Janet's breathing, fast and shallow. They tried to reason with themselves. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they were imagining things. But then, one night, Jack woke to the feeling of the mattress shaking. It wasn't subtle. It was violent, rhythmic, as if someone stood at the end of the bed and pushed it back and forth. He sat up, heart hammering, and saw a dark figure, tall, shapeless, standing at the edge of the bed. Its presence felt thick, suffocating, like the air had turned solid. He reached out, but the figure dissolved into the shadows. Janet woke to find him drenched in sweat, whispering, "It's here, Jan. It's right here." From that night on, peace became impossible. The Smurls tried everything, prayer, music, even humor, to reclaim their home. But the house seemed to feed on attention. The more they acknowledged it, the bolder it became. Lights flickered violently during family dinners. Doors slammed with such force the hinges cracked. The walls bled with scratches that hadn't been there the day before. Sometimes, Janet would smell perfume, sweet and floral, drifting through rooms that moments later reeked of sulfur. By the end of that year, the line between natural and supernatural had blurred completely. Even visitors sensed it. Friends left early, claiming to feel watched. A repairman refused to return, muttering that something ain't right in that place. And yet, the Smurls stayed. They couldn't leave, financially trapped, emotionally exhausted, and spiritually cornered. The haunting wasn't just in the house anymore, it was in them. Late one night, Janet stood by the window watching rain streak down the glass. The street outside was empty, quiet, normal. But inside, the house felt alive, pulsing, breathing. A faint hum filled the air, low and resonant like distant chanting. She turned and caught sight of a reflection in the glass. Not her own, but another face, hovering just behind her shoulder. Eyes black, mouth open. She spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. But the reflection remained, grinning in the window pane before fading into the rain. That was when Janet realized the truth. Whatever had entered their home hadn't come to haunt the house. It had come for them. Discovered something that would shake. By the winter of 1980, the Smurls' home no longer felt like a place people lived in. It felt like a place they survived. Discovered something that would shake. The walls seemed to hum with tension. The once warm, cozy duplex had become a maze of cold corners and unseen eyes. The family had learned to move quietly. Discovered something that would shake. I had to speak softly, as though the house itself might wake if they were too loud. And when it woke, it wanted to hurt. It started small, scratches on the walls. Discovered something and it would shake. Chairs moved to when no one touched them. But as days turned into nights and nights stretched endlessly, the activity grew violent. One evening, discovered something that would shake. Janet was folding laundry in the living room when the television turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, not just noise, but a deep, discovered it would shake, throbbing hum that made her stomach twist. She turned it off. A moment later, it turned back on. This time, discovered something that which the static shifted. A faint voice began whispering from the speaker. She couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone calling her name. Discovered something that would shake. Over and over, she untapla hands the shaking. The voice didn't stop. It only grew louder until finally the television went black on its own. It discovered something that would shake. She didn't tell Jack. She didn't want to scare him again. But when he came home from his late shift, discovered something that would shake. She saw in his eyes that something had happened to him, too. Jack had been driving home when he felt a pressure in the car, as if someone sat behind him. The rearview mirror showed nothing, just darkness. Then, as he pulled into the driveway, the headlights flickered, discovered something that would shake, and he saw a figure standing in front of the house. A tall, shapeless mass, darker than the night around it. It didn't move, didn't have a face. Discovered something that would shake, but it watched him. He blinked, and then it was gone. Only the house stood there, silent and waiting. In the following months, discovered something that would shake. The haunting became bolder. It wasn't just noises anymore, it was contact. Janet began waking up with bruises on her arms and legs. At first, discovered something that would shake. She thought she'd bumped into something during the day, but when the marks appeared in perfect shapes, fingerprints, scratches, and once even a long Daguerre mansion, discovered something that would shake. Deep welt across her back. She knew it wasn't accidental. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and feel the mattress sink beside her. Discovered something that would shake. As if someone invisible had climbed into bed, she would freeze, afraid to breathe. The air would turn cold, her skin prickling. Discovered something that would shake. And then a voice would whisper low, mocking, "You can't leave me." Jack tried to protect his family. He blessed every room with holy water. Recited prayers, even played hymns on a small cassette player. For a while it helped. The house stayed quiet. The children laughed again. Janet dared to hope. Shake, but one evening, as the family gathered for dinner, a sharp bang echoed from upstairs, so loud it rattled the windows. Discussing that would shake, Jack ran up to find a dresser overturned and clothes scattered everywhere. The word, HLP, was scratched into the wall. Fresh, deep. Discovered something that would shake and dripping with something dark. He thought it was paint. It wasn't. That was the moment he understood. This thing wasn't just haunting them. It was feeding on them. Over time, it seemed to learn what scared each person most. Discovered something that would shake. One daughter claimed she saw a black shadow crawl across her ceiling at night. Another heard growls coming from inside her closet. Even Jack's parents discovered something that would shake. Living on the other side of the duplex, began to experience it. Dishes flying from shelves, strange voices echoing through the vents. Discovered something that shake, and objects vanishing only to reappear in impossible places. The two halves of the house were no longer separate. The evil had spread. Then came the smell. Discovered something that would shake. Sulfuric stench that filled the entire house. No matter how often Janet cleaned, it lingered in clothes and food, even in their hair. Shake. The local plumber checked every pipe, every drain. Nothing. It's like something's died inside the walls, he muttered. He wasn't wrong. By now, discovered the Smurls had stopped inviting anyone over. They couldn't bear the judgment, the whispered rumors spreading through town. People called them crazy, seekers, even devil worshippers. But those who dared step inside never stayed long. Some said the air felt thick. Discovered something that would shake, like smoke. Others swore they'd heard growling from the basement. One sunken Jack and Janet decided to attend church as a family. Discovered something that would shake, hoping faith might drive the darkness away. The blessed prayed with them, blessed their home, and encouraged them to keep their faith strong. But that very night, just escalated. Things kitted. As the family prepared for bed, a crucifix hanging on the wall suddenly began to spin, not fall, spin. Slowly at first, then faster. Discovered snapped from thing that would shake until it snapped from the nail and crashed to the floor. The lights went out. A deep growl echoed through the hallway. Discovered that would shake, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate, slow, circling their bedroom. The next morning, the crucifix was gone. In the days that followed, discovered thing that would shake. The haunting became unbearable. Objects levitated in front of witnesses. The smell of sulfur burned their throats. Janet was slapped, scratched. Discovered something that would shake, and even thrown from her bed once. While cooking, she felt a sharp tug on her hair that pulled her backward so hard she screamed. That would shake. Jack ran in just in time to see her lifted, off the ground by something unseen. When he grabbed her, the force let go. Discovered something that would shake, and she collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Jack's faith began to waver. He was a rational man, hardworking, logical, but logic had no place here. Discovered something that would shake. Every night, as he lay beside his wife, he could feel it watching them. Sometimes he would hear whispers in his ear, cruel words in a voice that wasn't human. "You can't save her," it would hiss. "She's mine." By 1983, the Smurls were living in fear every hour of every day. Discovered something that would shake. The house had consumed their peace, their marriage, and their sanity. Janet's health deteriorated. Sleepless, anxious, haunted even in her dreams. Discovered something that would shake. Jack started losing weight, unable to eat. Their daughters grew quiet, pale, always watching the shadows. The once bright, happy family had been hollowed out. Discovered something that would shake, and leaving wasn't an option. They were trapped financially, yes, but also spiritually. Wherever they went, the entity followed. Discovered something that would shake. They visited relatives in another town, hoping for rest. But the same nighting, the same smells, the same nightmares appeared within days. Discovered something that would shake. It wasn't the house that was haunted anymore, it was them. Janet realized this one afternoon while doing laundry. She'd taken clothes to her parents' home, trying to escape the chaos for a few hours. As she hung the sheets to dry, the air turned cold, unnaturally cold. Discovered something that would shake. The fabric began to sway, though there was no wind. Then she heard it again, the whisper right behind her ear. "You can't leave me." Discovered something that would shake Janet. The basket fell from her hands. The sheets dropped. In the distance, a shadow moved, long and human, shape slipping between the trees. That would shake. That night, she told Jack through tears, "It's not the house, Jack, it's us. It's inside us now." Discovered something that would shake. By 1985, the Smurl Haunting had turned into a waking nightmare. What once felt like an invisible nuisance had become a cruel, discovered something that would shake. Intelligent force. A parasite that seemed to understand pain and how to use it. The house groaned at night like something alive, breathing through the walls. Discovered for something that would shake, waiting for someone to step into the wrong room, and when they did, it would lash out. Jack began to notice that the attacks no longer came at random, discovered something that would shake him when the family argued, when someone cried, when fear hung thick in the air. It fed on those moments. Every insult, every tear, discovered that would shake, seemed to give it strength. Janet later said it was like living with something that wanted us broken from the inside out. Well, one night, as the family slept, discovered something that would shake. Janet woke to the sound of whispering on her head, but beside her bed, she turned and saw a figure crouched near her feet. It wasn't a shadow. It was discovered something that would shake. It was solid, pale, and crouched low like a person ready to spring. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth stretched unnaturally wide. Before she could scream, it lunged at her. Jack woke to her choking, her body pinned to the mattress by something unseen. He grabbed her shoulders, discovering that it would shake, but it felt as if he was pulling against invisible hands. When it finally released her, she gasped for air, claw marks red on her neck. The next morning, discovered Janet couldn't speak without trembling. She kept saying the same words. It looked human, but wasn't. That incident broke something in them. It discovered something that would shake. They reached out to priests again, desperate for help, but after multiple blessings and prayers failed, the church officials hesitated. Without concrete proof, who intervened further? These things take time, one priest said kindly. But time was the one thing the Smurls no longer had. The attacks intensified. Electrical devices malfunctioned constantly. The family's dog barked endlessly at empty corners, its fur raised, its body trembling. Discovered shaky, sometimes objects would appear out of nowhere. Coins dropping from the ceiling, a crucifix flying across the room. Discovered something that would shake, a radio switching on with distorted voices screaming through static. And then came the assaults that left no doubt. Jack himself began to be attacked. Matwig's head would shake. He would able paralyzed, unable to move or shout. He could feel something on top of him, pressing, breathing, mocking. Once, he swore he saw a shadow shape itself into the form of a woman. She spoke in a low, rasping tone. "You belong to me." He said it felt as if his body wasn't his own anymore. He started sleeping on the couch, discovered something that was wine would shake. Afraid to share a bed with us, but began to notice. They'd hear shouting at strange hours, windows rattling in the middle of calm nights. Discovered some lights flickering through curtains. But whenever anyone went to check, the house seemed eerily quiet, as if it knew when it was being watched. Discovered thing that would shake. The Smurls' faith started to crumble. Janet's mother begged them to leave the house, to start over somewhere else. But by now, discovered something that would shake. The truth had become horrifyingly clear. The entity wasn't confined to the house anymore. When they stayed with relatives, shake activity followed would shake, whispering in the walls, icy drafts, even full apparitions appearing by the bedside. Discovered something that would shake. Janet's mother herself once saw a black mass hover above her while she prayed, before it vanished through the ceiling. That was when the family realized running wouldn't help. In 1986, discovered something that would shake. They finally contacted paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The same couple who had famously investigated the Amityville case, discovered something that would shake. The Warrens visited the Smurl home, and what they found left even them shaken. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, claimed she sensed not one but 4 entities inside. Discovered something that would shake, a restless human stood with a violent poltergeist, a demonic presence, and something far darker, older, and inhuman. According to Lorraine, something that would shake. The house was between worlds. Something had been invited, knowingly or not, and it refused to leave. During one of their sessions, they discovered something that would shake. Ed reported a growling voice came through their recorder saying out, "Get out or die." The Warrens began documenting everything. They prayed, discovered something that would shake, performed blessings, and recorded countless hours of audio. The tapes captured bangs, growls, and even faint voices repeating Janet's name. Discovered something that would shake. But skeptics weren't convinced. Local media caught wind of the haunting, and soon the Smurls found themselves the center of unwanted attention. Discovered something that would shake. Reporters swarmed their neighborhood, priests debated their claims, and skeptics accused them of faking everything for publicity. But those who entered the house, even skeptics, often left pale and silent. Discovering that would shake. One cameraman claimed his equipment stopped working as soon as he stepped inside. Would shake. Another refused to return after hearing a guttural voice whisper directly into his microphone. Discovered something that would shake. The Warrens believed that he had latched onto the family itself, particularly Jack and Janet. They advised a full exorcism, But the church hesitated again, discovered something that would shake. Worry of us, the Smurls felt abandoned, trapped between belief and disbelief. By this point, the torment had seeped into every aspect of their lives. Discovered something that would shake. Jack's work suffered. He began forgetting things, losing focus. Janet grew withdrawn, her eyes always darting toward corners. Discover shake. Their children were terrified to sleep. Every night they prayed for silence. Every morning they woke up with new bruises, new fear. Then one night, discovered something that meant shake. Everything changed. It was a stormy evening, rain hammering the roof, thunder rumbling in the distance. Jack was half asleep when he heard a faint sobbing. Discovered something that would shake. Thinking it was one of the girls, he got up and followed the sound to the hallway. The light flickered. The sobbing grew louder, raw, human, desperate. Timiguir mentioned the stair. It came from the attic. He climbed the stairs, calling out softly. The sobbing stopped. The air grew cold, so cold he could see his breath. When he reached the top, he saw it. A shadow standing in the far corner. Not moving, not breathing, just standing. Lightning flashed through the window, discovered something, and in that split second, he saw its face. It was his own. The lights exploded, the house shook, and something screamed, not human, not animal, but ancient. Discovered something that would shake. Janet woke to find him on the floor, unconscious. When he came to, he couldn't remember what happened, just the voice that said, discovered something that would shake. You can't escape yourself. Or from that night onward, Jack wasn't the same. He grew quieter, hollow. Discovered something that would shake, and the family realized that the haunting wasn't just around them anymore. It was inside them, twisting their faith, their love, their very sense of reality. Shake. When Ed and Lorraine Warren first stepped into the Smurl house, they described the air as charged. Shake, like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm that never ends. Lorraine later said that before even crossing the threshold, discovered thing that would shake. She could sense something moving behind the walls, not physically, but spiritually. It's watching us, she whispered to Ed. Discovered something that would shake. It knows why we're here. They began their investigation carefully, setting up recorders, cameras, and crucifixes around the home. Discovered the family gathered in the living room, their faces pale with exhaustion. Jack sat silently, his hands clasped tight, while Janet rocked gently in her chair. Discovered some during prayers under her breath. The Warrens knew immediately that this was not a simple haunting. Discovered something that would shake. Lorraine claimed to see shapes flickering near the ceiling, shadows that seemed to ripple and twist like smoke. On their first night, discovered something that would shake. Ed tried to communicate directly with whatever was inside. He used a simple tape recorder and a crucifix placed on the table between them. Discovered something that would shake, he said. Identify yourself. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, faintly, a voice came through the static. Something everyone froze. Shoo. The voice was deep, rasping, almost inhuman. Lorraine felt an icy hand grip her wrist, though no one stood beside her. Discovered something that would shake. The crucifix trembled slightly on the table. That was the moment she realized. This was no lost soul. It was something older. Discovered something that would shake, something that pretended to be human. Over the next several weeks, the Warrens spent nights in the house documenting activity. Discovered something that would shake. They recorded sudden temperature drops, violent banging in the walls, and even captured low growls that seemed to echo from nowhere. As that would shake, a child performed multiple blessings, but each one seemed to provoke the entity instead of driving it away. Objects shook, lights flickered, and once, a cabinet door slammed shut with such force that it splintered the frame. Discovered something that would shake. Lorraine claimed that the entity's strength came from fear. Not just of the family, but anyone who entered its space. It would play with emotions. Discovered something that would shake. Create illusions, even mimic voices of loved ones. During one session, Janet heard what she thought was her mother calling from the kitchen. Discovered something that would shake. When she went to check, the kitchen was empty. Only the faint sound of laughter remained fading into the walls. Discovered something that would shake. The Warrens reached out to the local diocese again, pleading for a formal exorcism. But the church demanded proof, tangible evidence. Ed presented the tapes, the recordings, and testimonies. Yet skepticism remained high. The case had attracted media attention. Discovered something that would shake. And the church feared ridicule if it turned out to be psychological or exaggerated. In the meantime, the Smurls were unraveling. Discovered something that would shake. Janet began to experience visions, shadowy figures walking through walls, whispers that called her by name even when she was alone. Discovered something that Jack's health deteriorated. He suffered migraines and moments of blackouts. The children had nightmares so vivid that they'd wake up screaming. Discovered something that would shake. Claiming something was standing over them. One night, during another recording session, the Warrens caught one of their most disturbing audio clips. That would shake. As Ed recited the Lord's Prayer, a growl interrupted him, guttural, filled with rage. Then came a voice's leave. Discovered something that would shake. She's mine. Lorraine turned white. She said she felt something cold brush against her neck, and her crucifix snapped clean in half. After that night, discovered something that would shake. They knew this wasn't a single spirit. It was a legion, a collection of forces, each feeding off the others. I would shake, anchored to the house by decades of buried darkness. Lorraine believed the land itself had absorbed trauma from generations past. Death's abuse. Discovered something that would shake. Anger. And the Smurls, with their faith and sensitivity, had simply awakened what had been dormant. As word spread, journalists began camping outside the Smurl home. News headlines read, "Haunted in Pennsylvania," and "Family claims demon in duplex." Some neighbors supported them. Discovered something that would shake. Other shakers whispered that the Smurls were seeking attention, but those who had spent even one night inside spoke differently. Discovered something that would shake. One reporter described hearing pounding on the walls all night, yet when he tried to locate the source, it moved, room to room. Discovered something that would shake, following him like an echo that didn't belong to this world. The Warrens continued to intervene, performing minor exorcisms and prayers. It would shake. They claimed to temporarily weaken the entity, but it always returned angrier. During one late-night session, as Aid sprinkled holy water, us discovered something that would shake. A deafening roar filled the house. Picture flew off the walls, and a sulfuric stench flooded the air. Lorraine later said she saw a tall, dark figure standing in the doorway, human in shape but with features that twisted like smoke. "It hated us," she said. "It wanted us gone." Ed collapsed shortly after that encounter, clutching his chest. Lorraine rushed to his side, praying aloud. Discovered something of the attack, stopped abruptly, as though the entity was mocking them, reminding them that it could choose when to strike. Ed survived. Discovered something that would shake, but they knew they couldn't continue alone. Finally, in 1986, after months of pressure, agreed to send a priest to perform an official exorcism. Discovered something that would shake. The ritual took place in the Smurl home over several hours. Holy water was cast on every wall. Prayers echoed through each room. The family clung to hope. Discovered something that would shake. For a brief period afterward, peace seemed to return. The air felt lighter, the silence bearable. They dared to believe it was over, but the calm didn't last. Scuffling that would shake. Within weeks, noises returned, softer at first, and then violent again. Janet reported seeing a black shape hovering at the end of her bed. Discovered thing that would shake. The children woke with scratches on their arms and returned exhausted, unsure of what more could be done. Discovered something that would shake. Lorraine concluded that the entity wasn't just haunting the house, it was attached to the family's suffering. They advised the Smurls to move. Discovered something that would shake, but the family hesitated. They couldn't afford to leave, and deep down, then, they feared it would follow them regardless. By the end of 1986, discovered something that would shake. The haunting had consumed nearly every aspect of their lives. The house had become both a home and a cage. Every prayer felt like a plea that went unanswered. Discovered something that would shake. Every night another test of faith. The Warrens continued documenting, determined to prove that evil could manifest in the most ordinary of places. Discovered something that would shake. Lorraine wrote in her notes that she saw in the Smurl house wasn't just demonic. It was personal. It wants them to lose faith, she said. It wants to erase the light in them. As she left that house for the final time, she whispered one last warning to Janet. If it ever feels quiet, don't trust it. The silence is when it learns. Discovered something that would shake. When the prayers stopped echoing and the priests departed, the house sank into an eerie quiet. For the first time in months, the Smurls couldn't hear nothing, no whispers, no knocks, no sudden bursts of movement. They dared to hope it was finally over. For 2 full days, discovered something that would shake. The house felt normal, but on the third night it returned. It began softly, almost mockingly, a faint humming that drifted through the air vents. Discovered something that would shake. Janet thought it was one of the girls humming in their sleep, but when she checked, both were sound asleep. The sound grew louder each night. It discovered something that would shake, turning into distorted singing, and then came the smell, a heavy, rotten odor that filled the hallways. It clung to everything like decay in the walls. Discovered something that would shake. Jack woke one morning to find deep scratches running along his back, long, jagged marks that slightly but formed no clear pattern. Discovered something that would shake. He hadn't felt a thing in his sleep. The family gathered at the breakfast table in silence. No one said it out loud, but they all knew the thing was back. Discovered sank. The haunting changed after the exorcism. It was no longer content to frighten. It wanted to punish. Objects didn't just move anymore. They shattered. Crucifixes fell off the walls. Water pipes burst without warning. Doors slammed with such force that the frames cracked. It's his Seiki. Janet began seeing flashes of movement, faces peeking from behind doors, hands sliding out from under furniture. Discovered something that Manching descend would shake. Sometimes she would catch a reflection in the mirror behind her only to find no one there. One night while Jack and Janet were arguing about moving out, discovered something that would shake. The entire house shook violently as if hit by an earthquake. The walls groaned, every light bulb exploded at once, plunging them into darkness. Then, discovered somewhere that would shake. Above came a low, vibrating laugh. Drawn out and mocking, the girl screamed. Jack grabbed a flashlight, but the beam flickered weakly. Something that would shake, barely illuminating the stairwell. He swore he saw something crouching on the ceiling, a shape all limbs and shadow. Before it disappeared with a hiss, discovered something that would shake. After that, sleep became impossible. Every the gust wind outside felt like the prelude to another attack. Janet stopped cooking, discovered something that would shake, stopped cleaning. She began writing prayers on scraps of paper and taping them to the walls. The kids avoided certain rooms entirely, especially the basement. Discovered something that would shake. The air down there was colder, heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. The entity started targeting the family's weakest moments. Shake at see it whisper when they fought. It mimicked voices when they prayed. Once, discovered something that would shake. Their eldest daughter ran into the living room screaming that she heard her mother calling her from the basement. Janet had been upstairs the entire time. That made sakes up to trusting their senses. Neighbors no said it. The shouting, the lights flickering late into the night. Some said they heard screaming. Discovered something that would shake. Others claimed to see silhouettes moving in the upstairs windows. But when police were called, they always found nothing. Discovered something that would shake. Just a trembling family in a house that felt off, as if the air inside was thicker than it should be. Then came one of the most disturbing nights of all. Discovered, Jack woke to find Janet levitating above the bed, her body rigid, her eyes open but unseeing. Her hands twitched violently, and her lips moved. Discovered no sound came out. Jack tried to grab her, pulling her down, and that's when he felt something push him back. Hard. He hit the dresser, shake, gasping from that would shake as the temperature in the room dropped. Then, suddenly Janet fell, hitting the bed with a thud. Discovered thing that would shake, gasping like someone who'd been underwater for minutes. When she came to, she had no memory of it. Discovered something that would shake, only a burning pain in her chest where a bruise shaped like a handprint had appeared. It was so detailed you could see the outline of each finger. Discovered something that would shake. That was when Janet began to lose herself. She would speak in her sleep, muttering strange words. Once Jack caught her standing at the window, whispering into the dark, saying, "It wants me to come outside." Her voice wasn't her own, lower, rougher, shaky, almost as if something else was borrowing her body to speak. The Warrens returned to fight back one last time. Ed came armed with blessed candles, crucifixes and recording gear. Lorraine warned him, "It's angry now. Shake. It knows it's losing its hold." But the entity didn't seem afraid. It seemed ready. As Ed began reciting the rite of deliverance, shake, the entire house erupted. A violent wind tore through the rooms as slamming doors opened and shut. The candles blew out. The smell of sulfur filled the air again. Discovered something that would shake. From the living room, a deep growl echoed, followed by a single thunderous word, "O-E-A-V." Lorraine clutched her rosary and cried out prayers, but discovered Sue had severed something that would shake. But the floorboards beneath them began to shake. Pictures fell off the walls. The tape recorder hissed and distorted, capturing strange and human laughter. Discovered something. One of the children screamed as her blanket was yanked violently from her bed. Then silence. For nearly 30 seconds, the entire house went still. Discovered would shake. He had lowered his crucifix, his voice shaking as he whispered, "In the name of Christ, depart." For a moment, discovered something that would shake. He thought it was over until Janet's chair lifted 2 inches off the ground and slammed backward, throwing her across the room. Discovering that would shake, she hit the wall hard and fell dazed but conscious. Lorraine screamed for Ed to stop. "It's not ready to go," she said. "It's fighting." When it finally subsided, the family sat in the living room, broken and exhausted. The Warrens left behind one final tape, recordings of the night's events, filled with unexplained noises and disembodied voices. On the tape, near the end, discovered something that would shake. There was a faint whisper no one had heard during the session. It said, "You can't cast out what you invited in." The next morning, discovered that something that would shake. The Smurls decided to leave the house. But even as they packed, Janet swore she could feel something watching them. Not from the house. Discovered it suffered something that would shake from inside herself. The walls were silent, but the silence was different now. Heavy, fine, like a predator crouched in the dark. Discovered something that would shake, waiting for the right moment to return. As they closed the door behind them for the last time, the wind howled through the empty house. Discovered something that would shake, carrying with it a faint echo. Not a word, not a scream, but laughter. The kind that doesn't fade even when you're miles away. When the Smurl family finally left 330 Chase Street, they didn't look back. Their home, once filled with laughter, birthdays, and the smell of Sunday dinners, now stood hollow and cold, its windows reflecting nothing but the gray Pennsylvania sky. As they drove away, Janet held the girls close. Jack kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, the house was silent, but inside each of them, the noise continued. The family relocated to Wilkes' bar, hoping the distance would break whatever had attached itself to them. For a few months, things seemed normal again. No knocks, no whispers, no icy drafts crawling across the floor at night. They started going to church more regularly, talking less about what had happened. It was almost as if silence could bury the memory, but trauma doesn't fade that easily. It lingers, quiet, patient, like a bruise beneath the skin. Jack began waking up drenched in sweat, certain he'd heard breathing next to him. Janet would find crucifixes tilted or candles burning out without reason. The girls, though happy to have new bedrooms, refused to sleep without the lights on. Once one of them said she saw a shadow standing at the end of her bed, tall, motionless, and when she screamed, it vanished. Janet told her it was just a nightmare, but deep down she feared otherwise. Word of the haunting spread beyond West Pittston. Local newspapers picked up the story first. Family claims house possessed by demon. Then television crews arrived, wanting interviews, photographs, and footage of the home. The Smurls had hoped for peace, but instead they became spectacle. Journalists, skeptics, and believers all descended, each demanding their version of the truth. Talk shows invited the Smurls to speak. They hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, hoping public exposure might help others, or at least make people understand they weren't insane. Jack appeared on The People Are Talking in 1986, his voice trembling as he described the levitations, the assaults, the constant fear. Viewers were divided. Some believed every word. Others accused the family of lying for fame. The haunting had followed them, not as a spirit this time, but as a story no one could escape. The Warrens stood by them. Ed declared, "There's no question. What the Smurls endured was demonic." Lorraine described the entity as unhuman, claiming it thrived on emotional pain. Skeptics, however, argued the events could be explained by stress, hallucination, or a shared delusion. A local psychologist suggested that the haunting might have been a manifestation of collective trauma, the mind's way of coping with years of suppressed anxiety and tension. But how, then, could it explain the scratches, the witnesses, the recordings? A priest who had refused to conduct another exorcism told reporters what happened in that home was beyond ritual. Sometimes, darkness doesn't want to be banished, it wants to be remembered. The story became a national obsession. Paranormal researchers visited the house after the Smurls left, conducting their own investigations. They reported strange, cold spots, flickering lights, and an unshakable sense of dread, yet nothing definitive was ever captured. No photos, no conclusive recordings. Just the feeling that the house itself was holding its breath. Meanwhile, the Smurls struggled to rebuild their lives. Jack returned to work, but colleagues whispered behind his back, Janet stopped answering the phone. They received letters, some from believers offering prayers, others filled with insults, calling them frauds. One envelope contained a single sentence, "You brought it with you." The haunting had turned into a mirror, reflecting not only the supernatural, but the fragility of belief itself. Were the Smurls victims of a demonic entity, or were they victims of fear amplified by faith and circumstance? The world wanted an answer, but the family had none left to give. They had seen too much, or perhaps imagined too much, and either way it had consumed them. In 1986, author Robert Curran approached the family to write their story. His book, The Haunted One Family's Nightmare, became a bestseller, blending interviews, notes, and the Warrens' accounts into a chilling narrative. The following year, a TV movie based on the book aired nationwide. Millions watched, fascinated and horrified. For the Smurls, it felt like a wound reopened, their most private terror now dramatized for entertainment. But what frightened Janet most wasn't the film, it was the night after it aired. She woke to the faint sound of tapping against the window. Soft, rhythmic, like fingernails. She opened the curtain, but nothing was there, just her reflection in the glass, pale, trembling, and behind her, something that almost looked like a shadow leaning over her shoulder. She spun around, nothing. The room was empty, but the smell, that same fall sulfuric odor, filled the air once again. She fell to her knees and prayed, whispering, "Please, not again." The next morning, she didn't tell Jack. She simply opened every window in the house and let the cold morning air wash through, as if trying to drive something invisible away. But deep down, she knew some things don't stay behind. They follow quietly, unseen, until you forget to be afraid again. Years later, the Smurls continued to deny fabricating the haunting. Even when pressed, even when mocked, they stood by their truth. "We didn't ask for this," Jack said in one interview. "We just wanted our lives back." The interviewer asked if he believed the entity was truly gone. Jack hesitated, then said softly, "Gone, maybe. But peace never really came." When the media frenzy finally settled, the Smurl haunting became something more than a ghost story. It became a question. Everyone who heard it wanted to explain it, to fit it into some shape they could understand. To skeptics, it was a study in human psychology under pressure. To believers, it was proof that evil walks unseen among us. To the Smurls themselves, it was neither science nor religion, it was survival. Some psychologists suggested the family had suffered from a rare form of shared psychosis, known as folie de plaisirs, a mental condition in which multiple people share the same delusion. The idea was unsettling, but it offered a rational escape hatch. Perhaps years of financial stress, family tension, and religious guilt had fused into a single nightmare. The family lived together. After all, Janet and Jack were devout Catholics who believed deeply in the supernatural. Their worldview already made space for angels and demons. Once fear took root, could their faith have painted the rest? Investigators who reviewed the Warrens' notes later pointed out that much of the evidence was anecdotal. The recordings of growls were indistinct, the photographs inconclusive. One audio tape captured a low, animalistic moan, but critics argued it could have been plumbing, electrical hum, or even wind reverberating through the old house's vents. Yet those who visited the home swore they felt something, that oppressive, airless weight of being watched. A paranormal researcher from Scranton University, who visited in 1987, described it like this: "There was no cold breeze, no sound, no movement. Yet you had the sensation of something leaning over your shoulder. Not malevolent, not kind, just aware, but not everyone was willing to dismiss it as group hysteria." Ed and Lorraine Warren had encountered similar cases: the Enfield poltergeist in England, the Perron family in Rhode Island, and believed the Smurl entity was a combination of human and inhuman forces. Ed explained it as a demonic oppression feeding on human energy. The more fear, anger, or conflict existed in the home, the stronger it became. It wasn't just haunting them, it was feeding. Lorraine, who claimed psychic sensitivity, described feeling a darkness that mocks faith. During one visit, she reportedly became ill, fainting in the hallway after sensing what she called a black mass moving from room to room. Her words painted a picture of a parasite, something intelligent enough to adapt, to follow, to hide in silence until attention faded. Religious scholars weighed in as well. Father McKenna, the exorcist who had once blessed the home, suggested that some hauntings weren't attached to locations, but to generations. He proposed the chilling idea that the entity might have attached itself to the family lineage, perhaps drawn by ancestral trauma or an old unresolved sin. Demons don't need an invitation, he said quietly. They need a reason. Then there were the skeptics, reporters, parapsychologists, and local professors who argued the case was simply the perfect storm of coincidence, faith, and folklore. One professor of psychology wrote in the Journal of Paranormal Studies, "The Smurl haunting reads less like evidence of possession and more like a symptom of cultural contagion, when belief itself becomes infectious." Still, there were strange inconsistencies that neither side could easily explain. Neighbors, people with no stake in the story, reported hearing screams and guttural noises and phantom bangs through the walls. One neighbor even recalled seeing light flickering in the Smurl's windows when the family wasn't home. Skeptics called it suggestibility, yet no one could explain the bite marks that once appeared on Jack's back, marks that doctors confirmed were not self-inflicted. Over time, the case became a battleground between science and spirituality. Paranormal experts argued that dismissing every unexplained event as psychology was itself a form of blindness. When the human mind can't explain the dark, one investigator said, it either denies it or names it. The Smurls did both, and maybe that's why it stayed so long. One lesser-known theory came from a retired police officer who'd grown up near the area. He claimed that long before the duplex was built, the land had been the site of a logging camp where several workers died in a fire. Their bodies were never recovered. He wondered if the haunting had less to do with demons and more with echoes, emotional imprints of tragedy replaying like a broken record. The idea, called residual haunting, suggested that strong emotion can stain the environment like heat lingering after a flame. Jack rejected the theory. "Whatever it was," he said, "it wasn't just an echo. It knew us. It hated us." Another theory, one darker and more human, pointed toward repressed family trauma. Some speculated that the Smurls' experiences symbolized something they couldn't express: marital strain, fear of failure, the pressures of raising daughters under financial stress. Maybe the haunting was their subconscious given shape, a phantom born from guilt, silence, and fear. The theory outraged the family, but quietly, psychologists admitted it fit the timeline. The worst manifestations occurred during the family's hardest years, when Jack faced job insecurity and Janet suffered postpartum depression. And yet, if it were only stress, why did visitors experience the same phenomena? Why did even priests report the growls, the shadows, the sudden temperature drops? The questions refused to rest. The haunting had become something self-sustaining, fed by attention, belief, and the relentless need to make sense of the senseless. By the early 1990s, the case faded from headlines, overtaken by newer stories. The Smurls stayed silent, the Warrens moved on, and the house on Chase Street was eventually sold. The new owners, when asked if they experienced anything, simply replied, "No, nothing at all." But they paused, just long enough to make people wonder if that was the truth, or simply the answer they'd learned to give. Years later, when a journalist visited to write a retrospective piece, he described the house as ordinary. Children's toys in the yard, a curtain half open, the faint sound of a television inside. Yet as he left, he glanced back and saw something through the upstairs window, a flicker, a movement, like someone walking past. He assumed it was a reflection until he realized the blinds were closed. The Smurl haunting remains one of the most debated paranormal cases in American history. It sits uneasily between science and faith, between truth and fear, a story too detailed to dismiss, too impossible to believe. Perhaps the real horror isn't in whether demons exist, but in the way the human mind can summon them from within. Maybe the devil doesn't come from the outside, One priest later said, "Maybe he waits in the silence, inside us, until we're weak enough to see him." In the years that followed, the Smurls tried to rebuild the pieces of a normal life. They left the duplex on Chase Street behind and moved into a smaller, quieter home several miles away. The new house was clean, bright, ordinary, everything their last home had not been. But normalcy, once fractured, never truly fits again. Janet still flinched at sudden noises. Jack still woke up in the dark, unsure if the whisper he heard was his wife breathing or something else standing by the bed. For months, they lived cautiously. Every flicker of the light, every creak in the wall became a question. Was it over, or had it simply gone quiet? The silence itself became oppressive. In interviews years later, Janet admitted she sometimes caught herself praying over the new home, whispering blessings under her breath while folding laundry or cooking dinner. "It's habit now," she said softly. "When you've lived through something like that, you don't stop being careful, ever." Jack, on the other hand, spoke less about it. He aged quickly after the events, his hair graying before its time. Friends described him as distant, not broken but quieter, like someone who'd seen too much to explain. When asked by a reporter in the late 1990s whether he believed the haunting was real, Jack paused for a long time before replying, "Belief doesn't matter when you've lived it." That line became one of the most quoted sentences in any article written about the Smurl case, and perhaps the most honest. Some of the Smurl daughters later said they struggled to separate memory from imagination. They were children when it happened, the age when fear and reality still overlap. "I don't know if I remember the shadows," one daughter said, "or if I remember my mom being scared of them." Yet they agreed on one thing: whatever happened inside that house, it changed the way their family understood safety. "There's no such thing as a safe house anymore," another daughter confessed. "Walls can't keep things out if they're already inside." The Warrens eventually moved on to other cases, their careers continuing to blend the line between skepticism and faith. Lorraine, years later, when asked about the Smurl haunting, said it remained one of the few cases that felt unfinished. "We prayed, we blessed, we fought," she said, "but I never felt the air clear. It was like something lingered, not a demon, but a shadow left behind." When the interviewer asked what she meant, she simply replied, "Not all hauntings end, some just sleep." By the time the 2000s arrived, the Smurl case had faded into the back pages of paranormal history. Yet on the internet, forums and message boards began to rediscover it. Grainy newspaper clippings, photos of the duplex, and quotes from the Warrens resurfaced. A new generation began to debate what truly happened there. Some users dismissed it as hysteria or hoax. Others swore the details were too specific, too personal to invent. The phrase Smurl haunting became shorthand for cases that refused to die, stories that live between truth and imagination. In 2017, a local documentary crew revisited Chase Street. The current owners declined to appear on camera, but allowed the team to film the exterior. The footage showed an ordinary suburban house, weathered by time, with children's bikes scattered across the front yard. But what stood out most wasn't what they filmed. It was what their microphones caught: a faint, rhythmic knocking from inside, though no one was home. The crew shrugged it off as vibration from passing traffic. Still, when the editor played it back later, he noticed the knocks weren't random. They came in threes, always in threes. Over the years, believers have claimed that demonic hauntings rarely end cleanly. The physical signs fade. No more levitating furniture, no claw marks, but the energy stays like a footprint in dust. Sometimes it waits decades, sometimes it follows, and sometimes, when the story is retold, that attention becomes an invitation. That's why some old paranormal investigators refuse to speak of such cases publicly. The telling itself was a form of summoning. The Smurl haunting, they said, was one of those stories better left unspoken. But silence, like the dark, cannot last forever. In 2017, Janet passed away quietly at home. In her final interview years before, she'd said she forgave whatever haunted them. "I prayed for it," she said. "I thought maybe it was trapped, like us. When her obituary was published, locals left flowers outside the old Chase Street house. No one organized it. People just came unprompted, as if the story had found its way back to the place it began. That same week, a neighbor reported hearing faint music drifting through the walls, an old song from the 1950s. He assumed it was a radio, until he remembered no one had lived there for weeks. The next morning, when he passed by again, the sound was gone. The air was still, but taped to the mailbox was a note, written in faded ink. It read, "It's quiet now." Theories continue to swirl, each one trying to cage the unknowable. Some say it was a haunting. Others say it was trauma, hysteria, or the slow unraveling of a family under pressure. But perhaps the truth is stranger than any of those. Perhaps the Smurl story shows how close we live to the edge, how easily the line between the visible and the unseen can blur. One moment you're folding laundry, and the next, something whispers your name. For the skeptics, the Smurl Haunting remains a cautionary tale about belief, proof that fear can take root and grow into something solid. For believers, it's a reminder that the world is not as empty as it seems. And for everyone else, it's a story that lingers not because of what it proves, but because of what it suggests, that evil doesn't need to be seen to be real. Should 2080,000 in the end? Maybe it doesn't matter whether demons truly haunted that duplex in West Pittston. What matters is that a family lived in fear for over a decade, a fear that changed them, consumed them, and never quite let them go. We like to believe evil is loud, dramatic, easy to recognize, but often it's quiet, patient, domestic, the kind that lives behind closed doors, waiting for the lights to go out. And if you listen closely, you might hear it. A faint whisper from a forgotten house, a reminder that some stories never really end. They just wait for someone to remember them. The devil's greatest trick, Ed Warren once said, is convincing you he's gone.